Havana today is full of sunshine and ocean breezes. Modern cars are moving here and there. Music plays from open balconies. Tourists sitting in the small cafes, drinking coffee and taking photos. However, 80 years ago, it was the casino capital of the Caribbean. Mob bosses built empires here, politicians looked the other way, jazz bands played until sunrise, and inside glittering casinos, fortunes were made and lost in a single hand. I can't travel back in time, but AI lets us step into that era through real photographs. So sit back and don't miss a moment. To appreciate what made Havana so unusual, it is worth starting with what the city looked like before the casino boom fully took hold. Havana had been drawing American visitors since the early decades of the century, largely because of its proximity to Florida, its climate, and the relatively liberal attitude of successive Cuban governments toward entertainment that was restricted or outright legal in the United States. During Prohibition, which ran in the United States from 1920 to 1933, Havana became a straightforward destination for Americans who simply wanted a drink. That early wave of tourism established the infrastructure and the reputation that the post-war boom would later build upon. By the late 1940s, the city already had an established hotel sector, a functioning nightclub circuit, and a population of local musicians, performers, and service workers who had built entire careers around the tourist economy. The music that defined the era was not a backdrop. It was the central attraction. The rhythmic styles emerging from Cuba during the 1940s and 1950s, including mambo, cha-cha, and the bolero, were genuinely original contributions to the 20th century. Popular music. They drew audiences from across the Americas and Europe who wanted to hear them performed live in the city where they originated. Performers such as Benny Moré, widely regarded as the greatest Cuban popular musician of the century, packed venues regularly. International artists, including Nat King Cole, who performed at the Tropicana multiple times and recorded several albums in Spanish, and Tony Bennett, treated Havana as a serious stop on any major touring itinerary. The Tropicana itself, which had opened in 1939 in the Marianao district, operated as an open-air cabaret surrounded by tropical gardens and by the mid-1950s employed a permanent cast of over 200 performers. The glamour of Havana's nightclubs and casinos was not accidental. It was the result of quiet agreements made long before the first neon sign flickered on. Fulgencio Batista, who rose to prominence after a 1933 coup and returned to power again in 1952, understood that gambling could turn Havana into a gold mine. American financier Meyer Lansky saw the same opportunity. Batista needed foreign investment and steady tax revenue. Lansky needed a place where casinos could operate with official approval. Their partnership gave Havana exactly that. And with that money, the city transformed. Hotel towers climbed higher along the coastline. Marble lobbies gleamed beneath chandeliers shipped from Europe. Tailors in central Havana stitched custom suits for visiting businessmen, while seamstresses prepared sequined costumes for dancers at the Tropicana. Bartenders perfected daiquiris and rum cocktails as jazz orchestras rehearsed for another packed night. The Malecon filled each evening with couples leaning against seawalls, watching polished American cars cruise past in slow procession. Street musicians played son cubano beneath balconies where families gathered to escape the heat. Vendors sold cigars and roasted peanuts to tourists fresh off flights from Miami. Behind the political arrangements stood a city alive with ambition, beauty, music, and people who believed the lights would shine forever. With the legal and financial framework in place, the construction that followed reshaped the physical face of Havana within just a few years. Lansky's own flagship project was the Hotel Riviera, which opened on the Malecon in December 1957 at a construction cost of approximately $14 million. The building had 440 rooms, a rooftop pool, a main casino floor, and an entertainment venue designed to compete directly with the largest hotels in Las Vegas. The Capri, backed by Tropicana and featuring actor George Raft as its public face, opened the same year at a cost of around $7 million. The Havana Hilton, which opened in March 1958 and stood at 25 stories as the tallest building in Cuba, was financed in part through the pension funds of the Cuban Hospitality Workers Union, a detail that was not widely publicized at the time. Batista's government had directed the union's trustees to invest the pension capital in the project, effectively using the retirement savings of hotel employees to build a luxury hotel that would compete with their own workplaces. The economic scale of what had been built was substantial. By the mid-1950s, Havana's per capita income was among the highest in Latin America and comparable to several southern European countries. The construction sector was employing tens of thousands of workers. American Airlines were running daily scheduled flights into Havana's José Martí airport, and the city's port was handling passenger volumes that had not been seen since before the Second World War. From a purely economic standpoint, the boom was real, and its effects were measurable. At the same time and in the same city, a very different set of conditions existed, and any account of the era that does not address them is incomplete. The prosperity of the casino economy was distributed unevenly in the extreme. The profits generated by the hotels and gambling operations flowed primarily to the American investors and their Cuban political partners. The workers who staffed the hotels, drove the taxis, and performed in the cabarets earned wages that bore no relationship to the revenues passing through the buildings they worked in. Beyond the Vedado and Miramar districts, where the hotels were concentrated, much of Havana's population lived in conditions of considerable poverty. Rural Cuba was in worse shape still. Sugar remained the country's primary export, and the workers who harvested it lived in conditions that had changed little since the early decades of the Republic. Schools, hospitals, and basic infrastructure outside the capital received minimal public investment during the Batista years, as government revenue was directed toward the tourist economy, and, in substantial amounts, into private accounts. This inequality was not invisible to the people living through it. Student organizations at the University of Havana had been politically active since the 1930s and became increasingly vocal critics of the Batista government after the 1952 coup. Labor unions, where they had not been co-opted by the government, expressed consistent opposition to the terms under which Cuban workers participated in the tourist economy. The intellectual and journalistic culture of the city produced regular commentary on the gap between the promotional image of Havana and the lived reality of the majority of its residents. It was out of these conditions that the political challenge to the Batista government emerged, and its early stages unfolded largely without interrupting the operations of the casino economy. While Havana danced under neon lights, something was shifting far from the casinos. In July 1953, a young lawyer named Fidel Castro launched an attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed. Many of his men were killed, and he was imprisoned. Released in 1955, he went to Mexico, regrouped, and returned in 1956 aboard the yacht Granma with a small band of fighters. Back in Havana, the city barely paused. The Tropicana still glittered, roulette wheels still spun, and American tourists still arrived seeking escape. Yet by 1957 and 1958, the mood was subtly changing. Police checkpoints appeared more frequently, military trucks rolled through certain neighborhoods, and newspapers cautiously mentioned clashes in the east. Inside the Hotel Riviera, champagne glasses still clinked and jazz singers still filled crowded rooms with music, while outside, university students gathered in cafes speaking in low voices, and workers in poorer districts grew restless. The Malecon still shimmered in the afternoon sun, pastel buildings glowed, and new hotel towers stretched higher into the skyline, but beneath the beauty, there was tension. Investors quietly reviewed their risks, some casino operators discreetly moved money abroad, and confidence in Batista's stability began to weaken. Still, Havana refused to dim its lights. The nightlife grew louder, almost defiant, as if the city sensed its moment was slipping away. By late 1958, the revolution was no longer a distant rumour from the mountains. It was advancing, and Havana stood radiant and restless, suspended between celebration and collapse. The end came with very little warning for those who had not been paying attention, and it arrived on the first night of 1959. On the evening of December 31st, 1958, Fulgencio Batista attended a New Year's Eve gathering at Camp Columbia, the main military base outside Havana. At around 2 in the morning, after realizing his military position could no longer hold, he quietly boarded a plane with his family and a small circle of trusted associates. Under the cover of night, they took off for the Dominican Republic, where Rafael Trujillo's government had agreed to give him refuge. The departure was not announced publicly. Most of Havana's population learned about it from radio broadcasts during the first hours of January 1st, 1959. Castro's forces entered Havana over the following days. The casinos were closed by government order almost immediately. Maya Lansky, who had been at the Riviera on New Year's Eve, left Cuba within days and never returned. He later estimated his personal losses from the nationalization at between $8 and $10 million. On October 13, 1960, the Cuban government formally nationalized all privately owned businesses, including the hotels and casinos, and gambling was permanently prohibited. The Riviera, the Capri, the Nacional, and the Tropicana lost their casino operations on the same day. What Havana represented during the 1940s and 1950s was a specific and unrepeatable convergence of geography, politics, money, and culture. The music that came out of those years was genuinely significant, and its influence continued long after the casinos closed. The architecture that was built during the boom remained standing, though in varying states of repair. The political arrangement that made it all possible ended abruptly and completely in a single night. What remains is the historical record, and it is a more complicated one than either the promotional image of the era or its harshest critics allow for. If you would like to look closely at another city or another moment in history, let me know in the comments, and we will take the same careful look together. And if you enjoyed this time travel, please also leave a like and watch our other videos. Thank you, and see you next time.